Hey, folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. Calm down, Hooperazzi. We were just a couple minutes late. I was filling up the old cold coffee machine.
What's this we? There was no we. I was sitting at backstage waiting.
You're 6 months late. We've been waiting for this. Mike's got new internet, which means, in theory, he's not going to be chopping up and cutting out like he used to be.
That's true. And you can see all my fun stuff in the background.
Yeah, you can't see any fun stuff, but I got a printer. I got a signed Liverpool jersey. I got a bunch of papers I need to go through. That's the fun stuff in my background. It is a very cold Thursday, February 20th. We are almost to the end of February, which means we are almost to the end of what is in all likelihood the last month of the last full month of Mike Woodson's tenure at Indiana. Mike, we'll talk a little bit at the end about the Purdue game because I do think in terms of the context of this season that's still ongoing, Sunday kind of feels a little bit like high noon for Indiana. But I think the thing we really haven't had much opportunity to discuss at length, certainly since you and I both really dove into some long-form reporting on it, is the coaching search. I think the first thing to say is this is going to be very much a period in time here, I suspect, for at least another couple weeks where everything that's going on is going on behind the scenes. And there's going to be a lot of noise and a lot of perceived activity, but I think things are going to stay pretty well below the radar in terms of what Indiana's actually doing here for still quite a while yet.
Well, I think the noise is going to be coming. Anything that does come out is all just agents sort of posturing, trying to, get their client's name out there and things like that. Like you said, I think the focus for Indiana is the rest of the season, and the administration doesn't want, like, if they were to go interview somebody and it to leak, and these kids to sort of be like, well, you've obviously turned the page. Like, why are we playing this? What are we doing here? And so I think that's kind of part of what this is all about. They can do enough behind the scenes to sort of set them. They're not losing any time by sort of doing that, taking that approach. I don't think it hurts them at all.
No, I mean, listen, I think the first thing to say is there's going to be more noise around this job because as things stand, this is the highest profile job that's going to be open in this particular run through the carousel. I know there's some.
What jobs would open? What are there? I mean, there's only like a handful that would. I mean, what would be the jobs that are more high profile? Duke,
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
I mean, that's the answer, and I think that there's, every indication so far is that Hubert Davis is going to get another year, but I mean, North Carolina's. I mean, they're really struggling. They've actually won 3 of their last 4. And now they,
But I'm saying in general, what are the more high-profile jobs than Indiana, even in the college basketball landscape?
I mean, UNC Duke. Well, UNC Kansas and Kentucky, I think, stand unto themselves in a lot of ways. I think Duke is a little bit. Ryan knows ball. I am wearing a Thrashers jersey. Ryan knows ball. Duke is obviously a little bit more of a modern construct, so is UConn, but those are also programs, particularly Duke, obviously, where you knew that like the near-term future is just kind of just like determined by the outgoing coach. So I don't think UCLA is probably a bigger job anymore for a variety of reasons. But I mean, listen, that I think the argument though is that there could be jobs that come open that can pay as well as Indiana, can maybe resource as well as Indiana, but are a little bit more forgiving. Like, I don't know if Louisville's a better job or a worse job now. Like, you can argue both ways to me. You don't have Big Ten money, but the ACC is a lot easier. Now, the flip side is that can make it harder to succeed at an NCAA tournament level if you're fighting for, sort of the resume numbers you need. That is a job where I think you can argue it both ways. The point is, there aren't many. The one that could come open this year that people wonder about is North Carolina. And I don't think North Carolina is going to make the tournament. Everyone seems to believe that sort of 5 losses in 7 swoon aside, Hubert Davis is going to get one more year. Obviously, Davis has had, he's had a couple of pretty remarkable seasons. UNC was a 1 seed last year. They went to the national title game in his first season. But that would be the other one. I mean, that would be, I think, barring something unforeseen, the only job that would really challenge Indiana in the carousel this year, which is why I say Indiana fans need to understand that their job is going to be used as sort of like a match, so to speak, to light whatever fires agents, coaches kind of want to burn, because there is no job more high profile and therefore more sort of publicly exposed right now than Indiana. But I also think, and I think that this was kind of maybe the first thing I really wanted to get into with you, is like Scott Dolson's working process. So we wrote something, and I'll link this in. People who are listening maybe have read it so far, but I will link what you and I kind of co-bylined at the beginning of the week about how Indiana got to the point of Mike Woodson, approaching Scott Dolson about standing down at the end of the season. And then much more than that, Indiana, like sort of how Indiana moves forward in the short term from here. And you really brought a lot of good detail about Scott Dolson's working process in the build up to hiring Curt Cignetti. And one of the things that we talked about in that story was that Dolson basically charged, some of the people he trusted under him to study Indiana. What was like Indiana, Kansas, was it North Carolina, Duke, Kentucky, maybe
Illinois.
one or two.
Yeah, there was like a group of like programs, and these will be obviously, when he does this for basketball, they'll be very, very different. It was basketball schools that had struggled traditionally in essentially football, but had longer periods of success or more success sort of over the last 30 years than Indiana had. And so,
but I think
commonalities in those stretches.
Yeah, I think what struck me in thinking more about that after we wrote the story, and again, I'll link that in like the comments section or whatever, was basically, I think we could all see that Indiana had sort of positioned itself to move quickly into the coaching search. Scott Dolson didn't drive home from the Purdue game in November 2023 and think, okay, now we got to get started. That groundwork was laid.
Well, and I will say, he has mentioned this publicly, that search for football was done before. He hadn't fully made up his mind, but he wanted that done sort of by the end of the season so he could take a look at sort of the landscape of football. Yeah. So that was already done by the time he made his decision about Allen.
And however that process aligns to this one in terms of Dolson's sort of the way Dolson's approaching it. And as you say, they're two different programs in two different places. It's two different problems to solve. But I think Dolson will probably trust the process in the same way he did with football. I think we are right now, from Indiana's perspective, much more in that phase of let's evaluate where we are compared to some of our peers, what has worked for us in the last 25 years when we being Indiana basketball been good, what hasn't, what has worked for our peers, how can we sort of start, sort of connecting some of these dots, basically. And then that is what's going to inform basically, I think, the candidate profile. And then Dolson, I suspect Scott Dolson will already be having conversations about some names, but I think that will kind of inform the candidate profile, and also, frankly, a little bit of when he sits down with candidates, this is what I'm looking for, a little bit of sort of the KPIs of the job. I think we're much more in that phase than we are in the, let's talk about hard names. Let's get in depth on numbers and contracts and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because I think when you're casting a wide net and doing your due diligence, like when you do a study like that and sort of do a comprehensive look, things can come up and that maybe caught you off guard, that you maybe weren't expecting, or drive the search. And I think that's certainly what happened with football in terms of prioritizing head coach, not a coordinator. Because, he ruled out essentially coordinators from that search, that they needed some guy, they needed a candidate, or any candidate they wanted to really talk to had head coaching experience. quarterback driven in terms of developing quarterbacks. Like these were all characteristics that they sort of gleaned from that search that sort of Signetti vaulted to the top. He had every criteria. But those are the things you're kind of looking for. So then when you come up with this candidate list, like you said, you'll have guys in mind. But I'm sure this will add to it and sort of maybe even come up with names maybe you didn't expect, because you'll have sort of areas where you want to emphasize. And that sort of in the football search worked in conjunction with the search firm that they hired at the time, Turnkey ZRG. Like they gave him that criteria. And they said, this is how we want to develop a candidate list. This is what we're working off of. Can you help? And they helped identify candidates too, based on all of those things that they gave him. So it all kind of works together. And I think Scott's talked about this probably with you in terms of his history working for Bob Knight, and sort of, it's ironic that Curt Cignetti talks about blueprints, because I think Dolson's kind of a blueprint guy and wanting to sort of have that tangible information in front of him to sort of work off of. And that's kind of how he's approached improving the football stadium, kind of that project that's coming up, and various things that he's kind of gone about during his sort of tenure. And so I think it's really important to the process, kind of going forward.
I think the one thing that's maybe, I think there's two things that to me are a little bit different here. One is, well, you're right, some of those criteria kind of shaved off, whole sections of what you call kind of the candidate list in terms of, we're not going to do coordinators, or we're not going to do a coach with this in their profile, or whatever. I do think the net's probably wider for Indiana football, just as a general rule, than Indiana basketball. I also think that Dolson himself, and you said this a little bit there, I think there's going to be a little bit more of Scott Dolson already having some of his own opinions formed on the job. And frankly, somebody said this John Mandel said this in the comments, and I'll throw it up right now. He said Dolson may have started this process last year. I mean, I would be surprised if, at least in some sort of conceptual way, Indiana didn't, because Indiana felt compelled to come out at some point last season and sort of like confirm that Mike Woodson was coming back. I mean, when you do that, that means that at some level you've evaluated whether you have asked the question, and if you ask the question, that means that at some level you are going through that sort of preparatory process as is. And I think, you talk about Scott Dolson's background in basketball. He's quite literally hired to this job before as an AD. He's obviously also been, he was, pretty consistently Indiana's sport administrator for men's basketball when he was deputy AD. So like he's been around job searches as deputy AD that he probably, if not necessarily captained, then certainly was heavily involved in. And so I think that like it maybe he's able to keep a little bit more of his own counsel through this process. But like, for example, I would be surprised, and we pointed out in the story, as you mentioned, that Indiana went to Turnkey, which I don't know how you I don't know exactly how you sort of quantify this, but Turnkey's probably as prominent of a search firm as any in the country. I'd be pretty surprised if Indy engaged Turnkey again at some point in this process. Maybe they haven't yet, because again, Indiana may be going a little bit more through the sort of, let's have a hard and fast idea of what we're looking for, what the job is, and what we're laying out in front of potential candidates before we start really in earnest, approaching even through a search firm, agents and representation and whatever else. But I suspect that at some point that will become part of the process too. Again, I'm just not sure we're at that point yet.
Yeah, and because like you said, they're moving cautiously to sort of keep the search out of the current players' minds, as to not distract them or think that they're being overlooked. And so I think that's sort of what informs, like, if things aren't necessarily official yet, they might be moving in a direction like that, just because, like you said, they don't want to kind of get ahead of the season, because there are 5 regular season games left. In theory, the Big Ten tournament. So you're sort of And I think the difference with football is you're operating from a position of strength. The timing's different because football happened at the end of the season, and the football sort of calendar is a lot different. And you were not operating from a sense of strength. I think right now, and maybe we can get into this, like you said, there's no more attractive job, and we could debate that. But like Indiana basketball is in a good spot, regardless of what the on-court product is right now. They are set up for success with the work that's been done with, name, image, and likeness. Obviously, their budget was already, top tier, and the revenue sharing, I think we both sort of reported on this, is going to be in that same sort of area. In terms of dedicating, because teams programs can kind of split that money up as they see fit. Basketball is going to get probably a higher portion at Indiana, not probably is, than at most schools. And so, and they've committed to the full, you don't have to do schools don't have to do 20.5 million to share it. Indiana's committed to that number. That's the kind of the expected first number of the first year of revenue sharing. And that's a huge advantage for any coach that steps in. And in our story, we talked about kind of the infrastructures in place from the overall athletic department to sort of make this all work. I think you've seen that in action with the football team. There's a reason they had success retaining their players. There's a reason they had success landing sort of, in theory, impact transfers or guys that were highly ranked. And I think that sets whoever gets the job up and makes it an attractive opening because you have that foundation there that I think is going to be better or as good than any opening or any program in the country, I feel like.
Yeah. So, let's talk about just because I wrote something right when the sort of, I guess if you want to say the search began, when it was confirmed Mike Woodson wouldn't come back, that basically sort of made the argument that the job is in some ways as difficult as it's been in 50 years, and in some ways is better set up for success than it's been in 50 years. I think that the difficulty ultimately just comes from the longer you go without the level of success Indiana expects, the less time each successive coach is going to get. And that's pretty much borne out. Mike Davis got 6 years. Tom Crean got a 3-year sort of rebuilding window grace period and then got 6 years. Archie Miller only got 4. Mike Woodson only got 4. So there is just that diminishing return of sort of basically the clock runs faster on each coach until one of them starts realizing that level of success. On the other hand, obviously facilities are fine. I know that stuff matters. That arms race kind of matters a little bit less now. But to your point, I think it is worth kind of going into.
Oh, he probably ejected himself from he did that the last time too. He gave himself a DQ. 2 technicals, I guess, right away.
I'm back.
He's back.
I actually
did you eject yourself?
I was trying to switch tabs and I closed the window.
That's what I said. You did that last time too.
Yeah, that's my bad. No, I think every Big Ten school is going to share the full 20.5%. Some may share some of it in the form of additional scholarships. I don't think Indiana will as of now. That may change, but I don't think so. I also think probably most, if not all, Big Ten schools are going to do away with the Alston payments. So the point is, this is all just going to be straight revenue share. There's not going to be any we're sharing it, but it's in the form of more scholarship money for baseball or more scholarship money for tennis or whatever. My understanding from the reporting we did was Indiana is going to either expects to, depending on how you want to see this, either expects to or is going to set its men's basketball rev share number at roughly double the average in the conference. So Indiana's going to look at what the conference average is school by school in men's basketball dedicated revenue share and is going to double that. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be some other programs that are at or near Indiana, and that doesn't mean that there are going to be, some programs maybe even that go a little bit beyond Indiana, but Indiana is going to put itself at the high end of the conference in rev share. And as things stand, Indiana is in as robust of a position as anybody else with NIL. We'll talk about this in a little bit because I do think it's important to kind of lay out how the House settlement's going to affect maybe some timelines here, but we'll talk about timelines in a minute. The point is, it in the same way that it would be appealing to, a coach who was offered, sort of joint coach general manager position in the NBA, if you had an owner that said luxury tax is not a problem, I'm committed to going over it, I'm committed to filling all the max spots I have and the super max if we need it and whatever else, and you're not going to need, not that we're just going to spend recklessly, but you're not going to need to worry about resources. I'm going to give you what you need to go get and then retain the talent that you think is going to make you successful. That's pretty much what Indiana's putting in front of its next coach here.
Well, but also, we should point out,
and
they did that last. They had that last year too. I mean, they went out and got.
Yeah, and that comes back to: are you hiring the right coach / GM?
No, but I'm just saying it's proven like they had that they've nobody has out there. Like I mean, they went out and splurged and built.
And I can tell you that got people's attention. Like I mean, I will not say who, and I don't mean to sound self-important. I'm not like the greatest mover and shaker of all time, but like multiple people who were not other media members, unprompted, raised to me a conversation about Indiana's NIL commitment at Big Ten Media Day back in October. And that's not, I'm not saying half the conference wants the Indiana job. I'm just saying it is the sport sat up and took notice of the kind of money, the kind of resources Indiana's providing its head basketball coach. And that's even before revenue sharing, which I suspect is actually going to tighten, broadly speaking, a fair few men's basketball budgets around the Power Four. That will not happen here.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to like I said, the foundation you have day one of this new coach's tenure. If he loses everybody, and I think you kind of sort of say like anybody that comes back is sort of a bonus now with these coaching changes, he's going to have the resources to build the roster however he wants it with whoever he wants it. Does that mean paying his talent that he had at this previous stop? Does that mean kind of getting the key transfers? Does that mean retaining some of the key players? I just think it's going to be, they're going to have the resources to do that. And I think that it makes it just a easy job to sort of pitch for Scott Dolson.
I think the other part of it too, I mean, I remember when, and it's obviously not in the very distant past, when Michigan decides just to promote Sharon Moore from within to replace Jim Harbaugh, part of the argument for it is essentially that Ward Manuel is just going to take like and sort of an even more hands-on role with football, and is going to say we got a first-year head coach here. We believe in him long term, but he's going to need some help. And so we're going to make sure that we provide like whatever the sort of whatever extra infrastructural support or guidance he needs. We're gonna like kind of really dig in on that. I think Indiana's got, in the other, especially like the bigger sports. I mean, obviously football, but even when I say bigger sports, I mean sports that are either money making or traditionally successful at Indiana or both. Football, women's basketball, swim dive, men's soccer, maybe one or two others. I think Scott Dolson's got coaches in those positions that he kind of trusts, that he doesn't feel like they're ever going to need hand-holding. He'll be there for what they need, but Scott Dolson's not walking into Curt Cignetti's office and saying, hey, I'll help you solve these problems. He knows Curt Cignetti is going to solve whatever problems, come up 99% of the time. Same is true of Terry Moore, and same is true of Ray Lewis and Drew Johansson, Todd Yeagley, whoever. Point is, I think the next coach also probably gets an AD that says, I'm committed to rolling up my sleeves and helping you build whatever apparatus you think is necessary. We've seen some schools adding GMs. We saw Indiana under Mike Woodson, I think, build out a staff that was much more sort of MBA in its profile in terms of how much support staff there was, how much duties like video analysis, scouting, player development got spread around among a number of people. You're going to have an AD that I think is going to look at the next coach and say, I am going to be there for you daily, not to tell you what to do, not to second guess your decisions, but to basically be the, I don't know like what the business world equivalent would be, but just be the person that is kind of in lockstep with you whenever you need something, whenever I can help solve a problem, whatever that is. Indiana is not going to be bringing somebody in, and I've seen Indiana do this in the past, and basically saying like, here's your key card, here's your parking spot, good luck. You know, it like Indiana is, I think, from the AD's office on down, committed to sort of a holistic approach to getting better at men's basketball, because quite frankly, I think Indiana kind of looks at men's basketball now and says, if we can solve that, and we've got a working sort of formula for football and a working formula for men's basketball, then suddenly all of this goes up 5 to 10% in terms of sort of operational success.
Well, I think you've seen that. I hate to use football as an example, but I mean, it is with the recent assistant coach situation. Obviously they were very proactive in re-signing Cignetti to an extension, but the idea of giving all 9 returning assistant coaches raises, and then giving, ripping up the deal that they had made, the new deal for Brian Haynes, and doing another deal on top of that to give him a raise when Penn State was calling and there were some other huge openings. Like, that's the kind of support that I think you're talking about the basketball coach getting, like whatever his staff needs, whatever he wants to sort of do to see, like, and when he lays out his winning vision for the program, IU is going to be like, all right, we'll help you implement whatever you need to implement. And so I think that's what you're talking about. Because in Cignetti's praise, not only Scott Dolson, but Pam Whitten for being sort of in his corner at every sort of step, even in the wake of the success that they had, to sort of kind of keep building on that.
I guess we should talk about timelines. As much as there is one right now, and there isn't a flat sort of hard and fast timeline at this point beyond the obvious one, which is, as you said a couple times there, Indiana is committed to not distracting from the current season. I think Indiana is committed as much as possible to giving Mike Woodson sort of a respectful and dignified exit, and these final weeks of his tenure. But there are some, I think, external factors at play that are going to probably not necessarily speed Dolson up, but maybe in his own mind, again, going back to his own working process, he's going to be saying, hey, by the deadline to get through with this step is this date, and then the deadline to get through with this step is this date. I guess like calendar that jumps out to you is sort of Indiana's got to be ready to move on to the next sort of phase by X.
Well, see, I think they'll go wherever the search takes them, and if it takes them, and it'll take them as long as it takes them. I don't see it. I mean, if there's a candidate that's sort of involved in the playing and they want to wait it out, like, and that's the guy that they target, like, I think they'll wait it out. Like, I don't necessarily put a timeline. I know we reported kind of talking about some of the revenue sharing contracts of it all, that some things tie into that, but I don't think that sort of forces Indiana's hand here. Like,
well, I'm not suggesting that it's like, I don't think Indiana's going to get sped up. I think it's more going to be like, by what point do you think Indiana in its own sort of internal timeline says we need to be ready to take the next step? Basically, like,
I don't know. I think it's just how the search unfolds, right? Like, I think the reason why, like, look, Cignetti's search, it got accelerated like crazy fast because Dolson interviewed him, I think, like at 5:30 on Sunday, so like hours after, I'd informed the team and Tom Allen, and like clicked, and everything sort of just fell into place, and it was like, that was it. That was the guy. That happens now. Like, I mean, sure. Like, I could see in a world where maybe it takes a week.
Well, I know. I mean, it was pretty clear Indiana, when Indiana fired Tom Allen, there was a clear and present desire to have that search play out within days. Like, I mean, days. because of the
day.
portal.
Not imagining. You don't go in and think like I'm going to have my top candidate by midnight that same night, and that's kind of what Dawson sort of thought after he talked to Seghetti. He's like, "This is the guy." I was saying like I think it matters like who they target, how many interviews they do, and what that produces, like how those meetings go, because I do think fit matters here. And so I think it can go quick as, or like I said, is there a guy that they just sort of deem important to sort of talk to before they make a decision, but they have to wait it out? Because I think that would dictate the timeline.
That's where I think for me, I think that's where the search firm comes in. Like like that's the job of the search firm, is to sort of almost have, I guess you could call it like a pre-conversation, so that if there is someone, I don't want to use.
You don't have to use examples because some people are going to say like that's the guy you think is going to get it.
Yeah, but like if there is someone that Dolson says, we need to make this person, he fits all the criteria, we need to make sure the answer is no. Well, that's the point of a search firm. And if the search firm comes back and says, the answer is not necessarily no, then Indiana might wait. But then again, Indiana can also go back to the search firm and go say, well, then tell us what we get the answer to be yes. Do you understand what I'm saying? So like,
yeah, but my point is, I think they want to talk to whoever they sort of target. So I don't necessarily know that they would say like do it in that order. But I get what you're saying. But I don't know. I don't think they need to rush. I don't think there's any factor that sort of pushes them to sort of hurry it up. Because I don't think they need to worry about retaining guys. Because like the minute the season ends now, the portal is going to open for Indiana because the coaching change.
Yeah, that's true. Does it work that way?
Because he's stepping down. So I think that the last day of the season.
Oh, I thought, okay. I didn't know if it was. I didn't know if that applied in the same way that it does. I always imagine that rule applying more like in terms of like after the window rather than before, if that makes sense. Like rather.
I think the window opens like whenever the coach is like done, right? Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Because the window itself opens, and this is the one piece where I think the external timeline. I don't think it forces Dolson into a decision. I think it just informs his own timeline a little bit, which is the transfer portal window opens a week later this year. It opens the weekend after the Monday after the first weekend of the tournament, rather than the Monday before the first weekend of the tournament.
When a coach leaves a school, student athletes at the institution are granted an additional 30-day window to enter transfer portal starting the day after the coach's departure.
Okay, so it must not be. It must not. I always just took that to be like a rule for like if you missed the portal window. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I think it's like anytime there's a coaching change, you can
probably. I mean, to be fair, like it probably is. I think it's designed more for athletes where the coaching change misses the window. But anyway,
no, I think it's designed so if there's a coaching change, you can leave because that's the coach you wanted to play for, and you don't have him.
The window opens a week later. It's only open 30 days. That's not really relevant to Indiana because. Like once you're in, you're in. It's not that you only have 30 days to decide where you want to go. It's just you have 30 days to decide whether or not you want to be in and then stay in the portal. The other big date, and I keep hammering this so that people like understand, because I don't blame like the average fan for not following the House settlement closely. There have been a lot of developments that it's a tree with a lot of branches. But the other big date is April 7th. Is the day the House settlement is expected to be approved. Now, that's not set in stone. There have been a number of objections raised to it. It doesn't, it's not like a guarantee, but everyone broadly expects that will be the day the settlement is approved, April 7th. After that date, or I guess beginning on that date, NCAA guidance has said that their new NIL clearinghouse, into which every NIL deal has to be submitted for sort of a fair market value analysis by Deloitte. It's the date that deals have to start going through to the clearinghouse is the date the House settlement is approved. As of right now, everyone is working under the assumption that day is April 7th. So any NIL deal signed before April 7th will not be subject to the fair market value analysis, which means, and again, we can, there's probably a more artful way to put this, but the whole point of the fair market value analysis is to try and stop the situations where NIL deals are getting artificially inflated just to funnel money to players. There are a lot of people who don't think that's going to hold up to legal scrutiny long term, but that's not really important. What everyone is sort of hopeful of from a football / men's basketball perspective, and this is why football has front-loaded all, and not just Indiana, but everywhere, has front-loaded all of next year's NIL deals. All that stuff is signed, sealed, and delivered. And the reason why everyone wants to get the same way in basketball if possible is everybody basically just wants to operate under the old and established way of doing things in NIL for one more year and give themselves a few months to watch the clearinghouse work, understand what the analysis process is, what conditions fair market value analysis has to sort of satisfy, and how collectives and sort of as some of this stuff starts to come more in-house, schools can basically continue to be really financially competitive in the space without running afoul of whatever sort of procedure or whatever sort of rubric the clearinghouse puts on NIL deals. So again, I'm not suggesting Scott Dolson will be sped up by this or will be rushed or pushed into a decision, but I do think there will be an internal desire to give the next coach as much time between their hiring and April 7th to take the NIL resources that we already know are among, the one of the deepest wallets in the country, for lack of, again, a more artful term, and pull together as much of their roster for 2025-26 as humanly possible. Because revenue sharing starts with the House settlement. Big Ten schools are already signing kids to rev share agreements. What you want if you're Indiana, or anybody, but Indiana in this case is working under kind of a tight timetable because they will be changing head coaches. What you want is to try and maximize both buckets this year. And you may not be able to do that once the fair market value analysis puts like a restrictor plate on the way NIL can be spread out.
Well, I mean, you do and you don't.
At least changes the process. What you want right now is just, we're going to commit all this money that's already committed in NIL and all this money that's going to be available in rev share, and then give ourselves 12 months to look at the process and evaluate the best way to continue to be financially competitive as that process is changed.
I do think you can, and they are working on these things to come up with deals because you just want to avoid the uncertainty, because I think Indiana is going to have a system in place to come up with deals that pay these players and make it through the clearinghouse by having them do the things necessary to sort of meet those requirements, to make the money. And they are fair market deals. Like I like, it's not going to rule those out completely. You just have to be more creative and have to structure them different. Like I don't think it rules out from big money deals.
I think that. But what you want is to understand how to satisfy.
It removes the uncertainty by doing it before April 7th.
Yes. Well, So what it gives you is, again, it gives you a year to say, all right, we got everything done kind of under the old way of doing things for 2025, 2026. Now we have several months to look at the clearinghouse process and better understand how to satisfy that. And listen, I think schools like Indiana or Kentucky or North Carolina are probably going to be better positioned in a sort of post-clearinghouse world, because it's going to be easier to make a fair market value argument for an Indiana basketball player than most programs, because Indiana basketball is going to have a higher public profile, and its players are, at least in theory, going to have greater market value or market, sort of agency, or whatever you want to say. I
think is the word you're looking for.
It could be all three. Who knows? John Mandel asks, who sets the fair market values? That's a very good question. Deloitte is going to be doing the fair market value analysis. If we are all being completely on the table, if everything's on the table here, a lot of people in college athletics do not think that this process is going to hold up to legal scrutiny. That essentially we're going to get to a point where somebody's NIL deal goes to the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse says, no, this does not meet the fair market value analysis that basically this NIL deal is inflated, and this athlete's fair market value is not what the deal is paying them. And then that athlete is going to go to a court and say, what is this clearinghouse? What kind of authority does it have to declare what my fair market value is? And then we're going to get dragged back into just basic sort of like, NCAA policy versus, I guess, free market economics. And there are a lot of people who think that the fair market value piece of this is not necessarily going to hold up for a while. But again, that's why everybody just wants, if possible, to get everything in ahead of that April 7th deadline, assuming the House settlement is approved on April 7th, so that somebody else can be the one that challenges it and gains sort of greater clarity over what its impact is long term. I mean, what do you think, just to kind of wrap this up, like, what do you think is basically the next big, I don't know what the word would be, the next big sort of like event in the timeline of the coaching search? Do you think it's like, do you think it basically has to wait until Indiana's season ends before like any of this seems to really gear up in public, or do you think something happens before then?
No, because with Brad Stevens' court coming out, and he was sort of an X factor. I think he wanted to get out ahead of it because he doesn't have like media availability like another coach. And if he wasn't interested, like he can't really say that outside of making a comment. So I think that was sort of a turning point. I mean, I think you'll see maybe a coach or two, you mentioned, kind of leverage the idea of somebody signing an extension that was sort of on a candidate list. I think we could see that sort of coming up in terms of what does that do for the buyouts? Does it make it sort of less likely, or is it just sort of on paper? I think those might happen between now and sort of the end of the season. But then I think that the turning point is the end of the season, because I think that's when you'll sort of say this guy did or not get an interview. I don't think we'll know that until, like I said, the season ends. But I think you could see some things like, Dusty May, they talked about getting an extension. Does that happen now, or do they wait till after the season? Or like what are those? A couple of those kind of things. Like a coach maybe isn't a real candidate, but gets money out of it, which you see a lot in football.
I think that's a good point, which is like I think the most meaningful updates are probably going to be informed by what happens elsewhere for a little while. That if you see some, some sort of, whether it's contract news or a coach, because listen, somebody brought up Huberazzi says as soon as Drake loses, of course Drake is coached by Ben McCollum. Somebody else asked, like, does Indiana need to move fast to get out ahead of other high major sort of programs? I think that for the majority of coaches that might want to be a candidate in Indiana, they will wait to see what Indiana does before they entertain other jobs.
Yeah, this isn't like football where there's other jobs where you kind of view as equal footing. I think if you want the best job of the market and you think you're a candidate, you're not going to accept another job and just be like, oh, I guess I missed my opportunity. I was the top candidate in Indiana, but I accepted somewhere else at Miami.
Some of these coaches will be mentioned for other jobs. So I use Ben McCollum as the example. Everyone expects that if Fran McCaffrey's race is run at the end of this season at Iowa, which it seems like it's trending in that direction, though I obviously am not an Iowa insider. So
are you breaking news?
I'm not. I'm certainly not. But let's live in a world where, for example, Iowa opens up. Everyone expects Ben McCollum to be a serious candidate at Iowa because of his background in the state, obviously where he is now, where he's from. Well, Iowa might need to wait on Indiana a little bit, in terms of if now maybe Ben McCollum would rather be the Iowa coach. I don't know. But, it is, these things are all going to sort of intertwine. And I think your point is very valid, which is for a while here, I think the updates we're going to get are going to come from elsewhere as coaches maybe sign contracts with their own schools, or coaches, make some weird public comment that sort of says, what in European soccer terms is what they call a come and get me plea. I don't know if you're Indiana, if you really want to talk to a coach who'd be willing to sort of publicly entertain the job right now. But I do just think, listen, I know that people are excited by what's next. I know that people are antsy or anxious to see kind of where this goes. I think from a standpoint of meaningful updates, it's still going to be a little while. I know that's not what anybody wants to hear, but I do think it is just kind of where this job is going to be for a little bit, frankly.
But before we go, you entertain the idea of this team making a run to the tournament before the UCLA game?
Yes.
Now, do you still entertain that idea? Because I mean, this is going to be posted before the game, plenty of time before Sunday's game.
Yeah, so. No, I mean, I think I said before. I think I said before the UCLA game, I said they needed to win at least one of UCLA or Purdue, if not both. And I think, I mean, I wrote something that just kind of looked at Indiana's metrics and Indiana's remaining schedule and things like that. And I called this game high noon. And the reason I did is because I just think if you look at, where Indiana is in the net, they're kind of floating in the mid 50s right now. Their net kind of rises and falls based on what happens elsewhere. Like, for example, they lost and have just gotten back a quad one win because Penn State dipped out of the top 75. Now Penn State's just back in at 74, but they might fall back out again. Ohio State could be a quad one win opportunity, but they are right on senior day, but they're right on the cut line. They're 29. They have to be top 30 to be a quad one opportunity at home. The only game left other than Purdue on Indiana's schedule that you can guarantee is going to be a quad one opportunity is Oregon, because it's away from home. But then you look at that and you say, well, it's difficult to imagine Indiana winning a game, 3 time zones away from home. I'm not saying they can't. I'm just saying teams on the bubble tend not to do very well on the road. Indiana's only got 3 quad one wins right now. And again, one of those is very much on the sort of quad one bubble, if you want to think about it that way, in Penn State. I just think that if Indiana beats Purdue and then goes 3-1, I think there's a decent chance they are at least in the bubble conversation. If Indiana loses to Purdue, I suspect Indiana could go 4-0 from that point forward and still not be on the right side of the bubble. Just because I think Indiana's got to get one more. This will absolutely hold up as a quad one win. No questions asked all the way to Selection Sunday. I think if Indiana loses this game, and then there's the intangible part of it too, which is Indiana had the Michigan State win. It was like, okay, here's a foothold to kind of get back in the season. And then they turn around and lose a game, that you can argue they had some chances to win in UCLA. You lose to Purdue too. I think it also starts to feel a little bit intangibly like this is just the direction of the season. Like this is just it. You can start to feel like the die is cast on you a little bit.
I thought the die was cast a little while ago. That's where I'm in that camp.
That's fine. I mean, and that may prove true. I mean, that may well prove true. I think this is, to me, this is Indiana's last chance to exercise genuine control over its NCAA tournament.
But even if they win, if they go what you said, if they beat Purdue and go what
4-1 down the stretch, they'd be 19-12. They'd be 10-10 in the Big Ten, and they would probably have somewhere between 3 and 5 quad one wins.
But that still put them on the bubble, right? Like you wouldn't. Yeah. They're not. They're just fighting to get on the bubble, essentially.
Yes, but if they got on the bubble, they don't really have any bad losses. Now they have some bad losses in terms of margin, but they don't have like quad 3, quad 4 losses. Penn State at home would be a really bad loss. Other than that, everything else, every other game they could lose here would broadly be acceptable. Even Washington.
Well, Washington's pretty rough.
It's a quad 2 on the road. Like you can live with that. Like you can, you'd rather win that game so you can say, hey, we have no losses in quad 2 plus some decent wins in quad 1. Because what you're going to have when you get onto the bubble is you're going to be facing teams that maybe have better metrics than you, or maybe have, maybe they finish with a better conference record or road record or something, but they're going to have a couple quad 3 losses. Like an ACC team is going to pop up with a couple quad 3 losses, and you can say, listen, missed a lot of opportunities, but what we didn't do was lose to teams. What we didn't do was post losses that say we are not an NCAA tournament caliber team. I think that if Indiana, let's game this out. Indiana beats Purdue, beats Penn State, beats Ohio State, and splits the West Coast trip. Then I think Indiana's at least in a decent bubble spot because their strength of schedule is good. They've got multiple quad 1 road wins, which is important. Again, something that bubble teams don't often have. And they would have probably at that point, I would guess probably 4, maybe even 5 quad 1 wins overall. That's a good number for a team that's just trying to get off the wrong side of the bubble. I'm not talking about a team that's trying to be a top 7 seed or a top 6 seed or whatever. I'm talking about a team that's just trying to separate itself from other bubble teams. But if you lose this Purdue game, like I said, this is your last guaranteed opportunity to add a quad 1 win. Of course, Indiana could go to Indianapolis in the Big Ten tournament and make noise there. But I think what Indiana fans learned, almost the hard way 3 years ago was the committee just doesn't give a lot of credit for what you do on conference tournament weekend because the bracket has to be mostly locked in by like Friday, because they can't just sit there on Sunday afternoon and start arranging everything according to all the, can't have this team playing here or can't have this matchup in the second round or whatever. It's just not practical. So if Indiana wants to be in a good position bubble wise going into Big Ten tournament weekend, I think Indiana's got to win this game. And, quietly, man, I mean, Purdue's lost 3 in a row. And, you can argue they maybe should have won that Michigan game. I think they were up 11 at one point late in the first half. I mean, Wisconsin, they looked bad defensively. Wisconsin made 20 of 22 twos. That's nuts. And then Michigan State actually was a game that when I was watching in the first half, I thought they were going to win. And then Michigan State just completely took it away from them in the second half. Point is, Purdue's season is obviously they're going to make the tournament and be fine, but suddenly their season is very much sort of, how does this group that has won so much in the last 2.5 years handle it when you've taken the Big Ten title off the table? You've handed them a level of adversity in the regular season anyway that they've not faced in a while, maybe not really faced it all together in college. I just think Indiana's got to find a way to win this game. I think if Indiana doesn't win Sunday, I think it starts to become really, really difficult to envision a legitimate at-large path. Hey, things are gonna, like the turnaround we saw at the end of last season, where right. Indiana wins 5 in a row going into the second game of the Big Ten tournament. Even under those sorts of conditions, I think it gets hard to see Indiana, with a genuine at-large path.
I just wanted you to Justin, because you were more optimistic, I guess, before the UCLA game, but they had more chances, I guess. But just wanted to see where you were at. And a lot of people, just before we go, talking about the postseason, if they don't make the tournament, I can't see a world where they accept any other sort of bid.
Yeah, so there's this. The thing is, there's this crown tournament, and it's not really clear. I've talked to a couple of people about this at Indiana and around the program, and nobody's been really clear, at least as I've talked to them, and it's been a little while since I circled back. But it's this Fox, sort of Big Ten, Big East thing out in Vegas. Indiana's not going to the NIT. Indiana's not going to the CBI or the CIT. This crown tournament, it's sort of been marketed as though there is a level of almost compulsory participation. I don't know that that's true, but it is worth just kind of keeping in mind that it's out there floating around in the ether. I think that's probably a cross the bridge when you come to it sort of situation for Indiana. I think that's also probably a little bit of a, maybe you can go to the conference and say, hey, listen, we're wouldn't somebody else be better served in this sort of spot? But I'd also point out too, I think the suggestion has been essentially that the conference gets like two, somebody said here, 2 automatic qualifiers. And again, the way that I've taken this from like the tournament's marketing is almost that those are automatic spots.
Yeah, they're just the Big Ten
like
sends 2 teams. It doesn't have to be too specific.
Well, they're automatic that go like the first 2 teams that don't make the tournament according to the net rankings or something. Like, I mean, Indiana may not be among the first 2 Big Ten teams not to make the net rankings. I mean, like right now, if you look at the net, Indiana is, I'm just doing this on the fly, Indiana's 11th out of 18 Big Ten teams in the net rankings. So, I mean, it just, I would be surprised if Indiana wants to, I would be surprised if Indiana is in a postseason tournament that isn't the NCAA tournament, given Indiana is going to be making a coaching change next month.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
I mean, they didn't play last year when they didn't have a coaching change because they just wanted to move on to the portal. So,
but if this crown thing, if TV, TV can change people's minds. So we'll leave it there for now. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. This has been Mind Your Banners for February 20th, 2025. Thank you all for joining us on the live stream. Thank you at home, wherever you are, for listening. We've got Purdue at Assembly Hall, 1:30 p.m. Sunday. And then Indiana from there just kind of gears up for the stretch run. Basically,
there's a big women's game tonight.
Yes, that's true. If you're listening
I'll be there
Thursday. Indiana, Ohio State, a massive opportunity for Terry Morin's team to add a quality win to its resume. Obviously, as both men and women really hit kind of the stretch run of the season. Only a couple weeks left. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.